Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Susan Coffin here at Attitude Magazine. We are very pleased to have with us today Cathi Cohen, who is a licensed social worker based in Fairfax, Virginia, who has worked with children, adolescents, adults in a variety of settings for over 20 years. She has developed a significant expertise in the area of helping develop social skills with children and training, and is the author of several books that you should know about, one of which is called, the main one is called Raise Your Child's Social IQ, Stepping Stones to People Skills for Kids. She's also written a variety of other parenting information, discipline, social skills, peace at home, and you can find out about many of these things on her website, which is www.instep.com. instep, I-N-S-T-E-P, PC.com. Cathy's a regular columnist in Attitude, and we're very happy to have her here today. So with that, let me turn it over to Cathi, and thank you again for participating. We're grateful.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be speaking with you today about ADHD children and their social skills. Children, we found over the years, I've been working with kids on social development for since 1990, and I was finding when I was seeing children one-on-one that they sort of exhibited a similar set of social issues that were getting in the way of them being able to make and keep friends. These children sort of had a similar struggle, and so we developed a program specifically geared towards children's making and keeping of friends. Children with high social IQs just naturally have the skills required to make and keep friends. It's really amazing. You've probably seen them in your travels, children that just sort of get it. They know how to converse. They know how to listen. They are able to read the social signals of other children really well. And what a lot of research is telling us is that positive social relationships play a really vital role in children's well-being and especially in the ADHD child's well-being. The ADHD child frequently exhibits characteristics that seem to get in the way of friendships. And these are the skills that we target in our group, Stepping Stones group. These are characteristics like having trouble reading social signals, understanding body language, facial expressions of other kids, but also conveying their own feelings appropriately, being able to kind of say what they mean and have other children understand them the way that they want to be understood. So we work on developing skills that are meeting those social challenges. And we do that in part by working with the kids, but to a great extent working with parents. Parents, your role in developing your child's social skills is I can't overtell you how important your role is with helping your child develop social skills. Some kids just automatically have these skills developed. Frequently with ADHD kids, they don't automatically have them, so they need you as parents to be able to break down the skills into sort of bite-sized chunks and help them learn social skills just like they would any other subject in school. And they require, your child needs lots of praise when they exhibit prosocial behavior. Because one of the issues with ADHD kids is that there's sort of this inconsistency in relation to reinforcement. You know, positive reinforcement may not get behavior that you're looking for, and negative reinforcement doesn't necessarily get behavior you're looking for. With social behavior, it's practice, 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 and consistent praise over time that helps the skills you're teaching them transfer from one setting to the next. So I'm open to your questions. I'm really looking forward to speaking more with you about it. Should we go from there?
Sure, I'll jump in with some questions here. We've got lots of great questions. Here's one. My 8-year-old son has no friends, and I feel really sad for him. When he's in a group to play, he just has to change all the rules, and he can't handle not winning. As a result, no one wants to play with him. Are there any tips or tools that I can use to help him make friends?
That's a really good question, and I'm sorry you're having trouble. It's very painful for parents to have to watch their child struggling in this area. An 8-year-old is at a really great age for you to continue to be involved in social development. There's a couple things I would do. I would, number one, try to arrange activities for your 8-year-old child that are one-on-one to begin with and of a short duration. There are some kids who are 8 that can, have a 2-day sleepover with a group of kids, but not many of them. And it sounds like your 8-year-old isn't ready for that. So I would start small, help create play dates, make the activity something exciting, something fun that other kids will want to go with your child to, but that are socially less stressful for your child. So not a setting that they need to do a lot of conversing, but rather something like a movie where they need to navigate from your car into the movie theater and then maybe a drop-off after the movie, but something that's fun and it will leave on a good note. The setting the date will end on a good note, and then your child could go to plan B in asking that child to get together again in the future.
That's a good idea. So an activity where participation is all that's really required to sort of begin to build a relationship. There's a question from Arthur here, and he's asking, are there fundamental skills? Are there 3 or 4 fundamental skills that need to be taught or expressed before social skills can develop? So can you sort of explain the background to developing social skills? Does the child need to have empathy or the ability to understand different perspectives? Are there certain things that underlie having good social skills?
Well, there are traits that certainly make it easier for the training to take place. One of them is a child's interest in having friends. We find that children who are motivated to have friends, that are interested in friendships, are going to have an easier time learning the skills, practicing the skills, and generalizing the skills. And empathy is one of the things that we work on in our groups, and you can work on as well. Of course, if they have empathy already, it makes it easier for them to do the perspective taking that's required in friendship building. In terms of the skills that you're going to be building with them, you're wanting to start very small with simpler, more basic skills and only get to the more difficult skills over time. I would suggest that you start with one skill at a time and make sure that it's really in place before you move on to the next skill. A simple skill, an easy skill to work on would be sort of joining in. Joining in is an easier skill, I should say, relatively speaking, than developing managing anger. That requires a lot more self-control and the ability to regulate their emotional selves. So starting with anger control would be difficult. Instead, back it up and begin at the very beginning of a pyramid of sorts, and I would start with joining in.
Are there others? Can you name some other skills, Cathi, that are early, the first skills?
Yes, we sort of divide the program into a set of 10 very important skills skill sets that are necessary for kids to be able to make and keep friends. And each of those skill sets, and in the book, each chapter, has a set of exercises. It's broken down into 4 lessons of sorts to be able to transfer the skill. The skills are joining in, communicating, and conversing, and that would include being able to actively listen to other kids, reading social signals, which we've mentioned, raising self-esteem, and what we mean by raising self-esteem is having a real sort of accurate understanding of yourself and how you're viewed by other people, because when children begin to accurately read themselves, that's when they are able to make changes. Coping with teasing is very important. The way that you cope with teasing is actually a skill in itself, and it will contribute to future teasing or lack thereof, which is the goal. Managing stress, solving social problems, resolving conflicts, and then the most challenging one that we found is anger control.
So for each of those skills, you have a series of steps that involve parents as well. Can you sort of amplify one of the earlier steps, communicating, or what some of the exercises are that you would do in a social workshop setting?
Sure, absolutely. We do a lot of role-playing, and we find that the parents enjoy doing the role-playing, and their children are always up for it. Role-plays are helpful in practicing future situations. So, for example, if your child comes home and says that they have been teased and they don't know how to handle it, it can be helpful for you as the parent to play the role of your child and have your child play the role of the bully, because children like to play the role of the bully, first of all, and secondly, they are modeling off of your responses. And you'll want to do a few of them. Try a few different responses to the bullying and see which one feels most comfortable to your child and for your child. Then have your child practice the response, see how it feels. Give positive feedback, critical feedback in terms of whether or not it feels like it would be a good plan, and then try it out the next day at school or whatever setting the teasing is happening on. Just make sure that you have sort of several, like a toolbox of ways for your child to handle teasing, because sometimes one doesn't work, and then they're going to need to have a backup plan, and then possibly a backup plan to the backup plan. When you're in a stressful situation like that, kids frequently clam up, and they only have one way of responding, and that may not be the best way of responding. And if they practice, they can have a more planful way of responding, which usually goes better anyway. And then when they have backup plans, they have alternative ways of dealing with it, which increases the likelihood that it will be successful.
We actually have a question here just right on the topic that you're discussing, and this is from a mom whose son is 13 and seems to be either bullied or get into a lot of fights. And she says she has a hard time giving him suggestions for how to handle it, as she was very bullied in middle school, and none of the usual advice that my mother gave me really works. So I think she's asking, what are some of the specific pieces of advice that you might give a child for how to handle teasing or bullying?
It's very tricky, and some kids are more, they're more successful using verbal kinds of responses, and other kids are not. Some kids are really quick-witted, and they have a response for everything, and these are kids that you sort of work on developing verbal responses, but other kids are really not. They get overwhelmed, and they lose their verbal abilities. So some of the things that you might want to practice with your 13-year-old is one-word responses and making sure to link the one-word response with an exit. Frequently with ADHD kids, I found that will practice the one-word response, and then they will stare down the other person, which can be seen as kind of a provocation of sorts, right? So they have to kind of practice an exit, doing sort of a word bomb of some sort, something simple like whatever or so or anything really, and then to make sure that they exit from the situation, because the tendency is, especially with ADHD kids that struggle with impulsivity, is that you might end up saying something that you regret, and the longer you're in the situation, the more upset you get, and the more upset anybody gets, the least likely they're going to feel in control of what comes out of their mouth.
Okay. So practice a strategy, a statement, and then exiting the scene. Sounds like a good idea.
Exactly.
Here's a person who has an interesting question also related to bullying, and it involves to what degree you intervene at school. She says that her son is 10 and struggles with friendships. Some boys come over from time to time, and things seem to go fine, but his son reports that at school, the kids run from him. They say they call him a weird, and they won't play with him. His mom has spoken to the guidance counselor, and they all consider what her son's going through bullying, but she's at a loss as to what to do. I mean, in terms of intervening at school, do you find that school intervention can be effective? And if so, how? She also says she just doesn't understand what her son is doing to cause other kids to pick on him. Well, that's another
which is a second question, exactly. Right. But it's an important one. Sometimes it's that your child isn't doing anything, and they're just being targeted in some way. Sometimes it's in part because of the reaction that the bullies are getting. When a child responds with a lot of sort of upset or, lots of tears, it's very reinforcing to a bully or set of bullies, and so they continue it. And but in terms of your question about the school, I do think that schools can be very helpful in dealing with bullying on a lot of levels. It wouldn't be my first plan of action, because I would really want to see that this kind of situation occurs 3 times. And if your child's reporting that the same child or the same group of children is teasing, 3 times in a row, that is something that I would bring to the schools, because it's important for your child and for you to sort of differentiate between sort of a teasing the way all 10-year-olds tease and doing what this situation sounds like, which is that it's repetitive, it's repeated, and it's with the same group of children. So in this case, it would be a very good idea to get the school involved in the situation. And what I found most effective on the part of schools for dealing with these situations is to work with the kids in the situation who are bystanders. Usually in this group of bullies, there's a main bully, there are a couple of henchmen that also are contributing to this dynamic, and then there's a few of sort of other kids who may not be doing anything, but they're not comfortable with it, and they don't like it. And it's really important for the guidance counselor to empower other children in the setting to stick up for your child. And they always exist. It's a matter of sort of empowering them to take action. There are always even within a group, kids that are uncomfortable with what's going on. And when they're given the permission, they will typically back up your child. The other thing is for your child to make sure that he chooses other people to be with during unstructured activities. So find another friend, find another group, something that insulates him from the bullying of this other group of kids. And,
how would that work at school? He would,
if he's linked up with someone else, or he's linked up with preferably a couple of other kids, it's less likely that that original group of bullies is going to start to take him on because he's kind of buffered and insulated by these other kids. The other thing he can do is sort of, be in the sort of eye of whatever adult is out there on the playground, because that adult on the playground becomes a good ally for you as a parent in seeing what's going on, taking on what's going on, setting the stage for it to be seen as not okay for your child.
I guess this is part of what we're discussing is addressing a couple of questions here. One from Anne: how do you help an ADHD child deal with mocking? This is a 9-year-old who is mocked. And similarly, when should parents intervene when a child's having social problems at school or in the neighborhood?
Right. It's such a tricky question because so much of it is relationship-based. In the neighborhood, for example, if you have a friend, a neighbor in the neighborhood who you're good friends with, and their child is the one who's doing the mocking, it's going to be easier to have a conversation with that parent than it is going to be with a total stranger.
So you do suggest speaking to the other parent, though?
If, and this is a big if too, Susan, I think you have to make sure that you're ready to approach the parent in a neutral way. If you're really upset yourself and you really feel like their child is a mean, horrible kid, if you communicate that, if you go at them with all your, barrels of your gun blazing, that's not going to be productive, in my view. As if you really think it through, you kind of practice it in your own head, and you approach the other parent and say, hey, I want to talk to you about something that's going on in the neighborhood that I'm concerned about. Maybe between the two of us we can figure out how to solve this issue. It's much more neutral than attacking. And when it comes to our baby cubs, we're like lions in our protectiveness, and our immediate reaction may not be the best reaction. So just think it through before you get involved with another parent. I find when it's thought through and done in this sort of neutral problem-solving, you and I can figure this out together way, it can be a very successful method for dealing with neighborhood bullying. In terms of at school, mocking is difficult because I don't know if I know exactly what that means. If it's sort of a more periodic, happens sometimes sort of thing, that's going to be a different set of solutions than if it's, your child getting mocked throughout the course of the day over and over and repetitively, and it feels like a situation where your child is being bullied. Mocking can be, if it's handled, okay, and if it's not repetitive and ongoing, your child could probably think of a few responses for dealing with the mocking that might actually nullify it. Whenever possible, I say that it's good for parents not to get involved, because it's really important that your child learns the skills to be able to handle these situations, because they're going to happen. They're going to happen over and over and over again through the course of their childhood. And if we, as parents, have this impulse to protect them at all costs and, rush in and pick them up so that they don't feel pain, which is our impulse, we don't really teach them how to do it themselves. Having said that, if your child's being physically abused or it's this repetitive power situation, then you have to get involved. When it comes to the former, that's when you're encouraging, you know that they can handle it, you're there to role play that with them, different reactions, to practice. You're staying as neutral as possible, but you're expressing confidence in their ability to handle the situation.
It's interesting that you say that. I'm seeing a question now from someone whose daughter has made very few friends at school, comes home in tears saying that other kids are calling her stupid. And this mom, Beth, wants advice on how to help her child deal with it herself. She says she tells her daughter that calling someone stupid is mean and that she's not stupid, but what can she do to help her child cope with this best?
It's so hard when they come home with having been treated this way. I think that you could work with your child on practicing responses to different put-downs, because it varies. Put-downs vary. Kids have one-word put-downs for every possible feeling that they want to convey. Your child can learn ways to respond to the put-downs besides just ignoring. I think sometimes parents say, just ignore it, but the children feel like they're going to combust. They're just going to implode with their strong feelings when they don't have a way to deal with it more directly. So some of the things you might try with your child is work on, I don't know if your child's really good at doing a dirty look. Some of the kids we work with are really bad at dirty looks because they have these sweet faces, and it's really hard for them to make a dirty look that sticks, that really shows attitude. But we will get in front of the mirror with our kids and have them practice kind of giving a steely look, and some of them get it and some of them don't. Some of them we say, okay, the dirty look technique is not going to work for you because you just have that kind of face that can't express attitude. So we'll go to plan B. So that's one idea for your 8-year-old. Another one is to have her practice one-word response and walk away, like we talked about earlier. Another one is to distract sort of yourself as your child, to just ignore them but talk to someone else, so you're actually active. You're not just silently listening to it. You're actively going about interacting with someone else to block somebody else. There's something more powerful in that response than just a simple ignoring. Your child can show you what they do currently, and you can get a feel, you can get a sense for what it is that they're doing, and then you can try some ways that you would react if it happened to you, and see if any of the ways that you react would work for your child. So it's practicing different things, and there's not usually one solution to these things. There's usually a combination, a toolbox of teasing techniques that are most useful in a situation like this.
Okay. A number of people have said things like, here's one, Liz, what are good responses to put-downs? The ones I want to suggest are definitely wrong. Says Mama Bear.
Oh, I know it. I know it.
So, yeah, I think that for many parents it's just hard to come up with suggestions because it's so personally painful.
It is. And it's, for some, I found this especially with our dads, they feel like you just have to punch them in the nose, You have to have a physical response, and I can't recommend that for a lot of different reasons. Usually because it might help things in a short-term way, but in a long-term way, it really is more destructive.
We do have a number of questions from people who say their child responds by being aggressive or hitting, out of concern for feeling insecure or what result of their treatment by other kids.
Exactly, and it's frustration, and it's sort of, that's the tool that they have. What I found is if you give them other tools that they can really think about when it happens, and they're more prepared, they're less likely to be impulsive and to do their fallback plan, which might be the aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Another little technique, I mean, there's a lot of them. They're all in Raise Your Child's Social IQ. But another one that's been useful for some kids is to sort of ask a distracting question when they're calling names, like just, so do you have the time? Something very flatly that takes them off guard, and then,
right.
Make sure they walk away if they can walk away at that time. Finding friends to be with really does help because it is, as I say, a buffer. Sometimes kids say mean things like, you suck, when you're playing a game and you made a mistake. Sometimes it helps to just say, I'm working on it. That wasn't my best kick. But just sort of acknowledge it and move on rather than react. We will go out of our way to tease kids. They know that we're doing this on purpose. They know that it's not real. And they'll know it's not real with you as parents to try to go about recreating the scene so that they can figure out what works best. I can see that there's lots of questions about teasing and bullying. I think
and here's someone who's asking
one.
An interesting question here. She says, we're talking a lot about teasing and bullying, but what is the behavior of ADHD kids that seems to make them targets? What are being called weirdos, and what is it that they're doing, and is there anything we can do about those behaviors themselves that set them up for being targeted?
That's a very good question. What we found in our working with, hundreds of groups, is there's a few things that trip kids up. And if they can avoid these particular behaviors, it does minimize the likelihood that they're going to be teased to begin with. One of the things that ADHD kids do that sometimes frustrates other kids is sort of bringing up random subjects. So there'll be a topic that's being discussed, and your ADHD child might be thinking about one aspect of the conversation and sort of get stuck in their minds thinking about it, and the conversation meanwhile continues, and then they interject with something that happened 10 minutes before, or change the subject precipitously to talk about something else that's more interesting, or take a left turn in the conversation, like you're having a conversation about football, and then it reminds your child about a sunny day, and they talk about it being a sunny day instead of continuing on the topic of football. Behaviors that are sort of, may not be aware of that they're doing, like telling on another child for being on the wrong page at school, sort of blurting out, Kathy's on page 32 and we're supposed to be on page 23. That sort of thing. Kids don't like that very much. Getting involved with other kids' business when it may not be on their radar screen as something that they're part of. These are all kind of ways that ADHD kids can sometimes turn off their peers. We find that some kids are sort of have trouble with body space and boundaries.
Yeah, we have several questions on that. Kids who are just inappropriate in their physical interactions with other kids, and parents asking, how do I explain this, that they need to change their behavior, the physical behavior.
A little game or an exercise you can work on is we have these hula hoops, and we put a hula hoop around the outside of a child, and we have another child in the group move closer while they're talking to the child in the hula hoop. And then they have the child move into the hula hoop with the other child. And in the meantime, they're asking the child in the hula hoop, how are they feeling now in the discussion? And as they get closer, how are they feeling now? As they get closer, how are you feeling now? And then inevitably they really get it when the child gets in the hula hoop with them, that it's like not appropriate, like you're too close. So we work on arm distance, maintaining arm distance. The hula hoop around is kind of a visual of, the space that people really require. Because that is another one of those behaviors that frustrate other kids and that your child may not be aware of, that they're just getting too close, that they need to keep at an arm's distance from kids. Another is, it's okay to be huggy, when you're 5. It's okay to be huggy when you're in preschool, but when you're 10 or 11, little boys generally don't like to be hugged, So it's kind of going over with your child, figuring out when it's okay to be affectionate. There's time and there's place and there's people. It's okay to be affectionate with your family, but with kids at school, you kind of, at a certain age, it's just not okay to hug anymore.
Right.
Which is sad, but it's true. And those are all behaviors that your kids really can learn to move away from, which may be contributing to some of the teasing that's going on.
Right. I guess there are a number of questions from parents who say they don't think their child is aware of their social problems or aware of their behaviors, and they're wondering how, sort of one case is a kid who feels bullied and is upset about it, and there's one set of actions, but then another child who just doesn't seem aware of the fact that they are being bullied or are not behaving appropriately. Should parents leap in and bring up suggestions about their child's behavior?
That's such a difficult line, right? Because on the one hand, if your child's not aware of being teased or being left out, then he doesn't feel the pain of being teased or being left out. On the other hand, like you're saying, as parents, if your child's not aware of being teased or mocked or being left out, then they can't change the behavior that may be leading or contributing to it. So how do you sort of increase their awareness and at the same time realize that increased awareness will lead to initially a little bit more pain, right? But it's kind of a necessary pain in small quantities to be able to develop self-awareness and then to change.
So we would suggest that the parents point out problems.
And I think there are ways that parents could point it out that might be a little bit sort of easier for parents, but also easier for kids to swallow. And I think sometimes questions are helpful, like how did you experience that, or what did you see happening there? So you sort of get the child to become more aware, but you're not necessarily saying, did you just see what just happened to you? Which can be, might be a little bit too far and more hurtful for the child.
I think one of the examples from a question here, and there are several questions along this line, is from Lori, who says, my daughter is not being bullied. The problem is that her impulsiveness and poor sort of regulation causes her to be really bossy and verbally aggressive with her peers. So she has difficulty making friends. What should the parent do with that kind of behavior? And there's a number of other questions from parents like that who see their children's behavior and know that it's causing problems, but their children aren't necessarily aware of it.
It's a little bit tricky because you don't want to point out these things with other kids around, because that can be embarrassing and sort of humiliating for your child. On occasion, though, with some ADHD kids, you might have to say something like, Cathi, I need your help for a second. If you really see something going awry, like your child is unwittingly kind of digging a social grave for themselves, you might have to say, could you come here? I need your help for a second. And you might need to quietly and in your own space say, I'm noticing that, your behavior is upsetting your friends. You're needing to go with the flow right now, and then have them go back into the social setting. It's really useful if in advance of a social situation you talk about this behavior, so it's outside of the behavior itself. You talk about it and then say, how about in the future if I quietly signal you when I see this going on? And then you can develop a secret signal with each other. And during the social situation, you can either, do your signal, or you could have said in advance you're going to say that you need their help with something, and then you're going to, prompt them as to the behavior they're showing, but also the appropriate behavior that they should be showing. Sometimes with ADHD kids, they get a lot of, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that, you're bossy, you're this, but they don't really know what to do.
Right.
So it's helpful if you do prompt, that you prompt with what they should do instead of what they're doing.
So an example here from Julia again is bossiness is our problem as well, but our daughter just doesn't see what she does as being bossy. She says things politely, so she thinks it's okay.
Right. And, and some of that sort of does get figured out in that kids let other kids know that it's not okay, and so that's some of it. But what can help for you is that you highlight the reaction of the child that you're seeing, because I'm sure your child's not aware of it. They wouldn't do it if they really felt like it was something objectionable. They really feel like what they want to do is the best thing to do. They can't imagine that anyone else feels differently. And so it becomes your job to highlight the feelings of the other. You could even ask them, instead of saying it, if you think they're going to get defensive, you can say, I just want you to look at your friend's face, and then we can talk later about what your friend's face is saying. And slowly you're planting seeds. It's not like it's a miracle, like one day you tell them no more bullying and they say, okay, I'm not going to bully anymore. It's a subtle process of tuning into the other person's facial expressions and body language, and tuning into the self, and tuning into the other person, and tuning into the self. That's how these skills develop.
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying, because there's a very specific question here from someone whose son is 12 and has lots of friends, but she's noticed that he's increasingly getting into sort of physical conflicts. She says when his friends come over, she has to remind him constantly to stop wrestling, pushing, and being so hands-on. She's heard some of his friends say, calm down, man, and she's tried to explain it to him that he's going to lose his friends if he doesn't stop this behavior, but he just doesn't see it. He says, they like it, Mom. So her question is, should she intervene, or should she just wait till he loses his friends and figures it out on his own? But this would speak to what you're saying, maybe take him aside and say, take a look at your friend's face, or is that an example of where that technique might work?
That's a really interesting situation and question. I think in that case, you can set up a rule in advance of a social situation. So you can say, we keep our hands and feet to ourselves in this house. Or
that's interesting, yeah.
That's just a rule that we keep up. And
so don't even link it to the impact on friendships. Just say this is our behavior.
This is what we do.
Right.
It's not okay, because you as a parent know that your child, once they get into a tussle, can't calm themselves down like a typical child. ADHD kids can get very revved up, and then they just don't have the ability to kind of settle back down again, and they can get then out of control, and it leads to more aggression or behavior that's not okay. So in that situation, because it's a behavior that you can set as a house rule, you can do the fallback on the house rule.
That's great. Yeah, just
and
don't
not
even,
ask for input. It's just
don't
not okay.
negotiate. Don't discuss it. Just that's the rule. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Here's a question that I think all of us, all parents can identify with, from Heather. She says, my 9-year-old daughter is having a birthday party this weekend at a laser tag place, so lots of, a fair number of kids are coming. What social skills should we practice ahead of time so that she has a chance for a successful birthday party? Because that's a situation that a lot of kids sort of melt down in, right, with lots of kids and lots of activity, and
it can be very stimulating, very overstimulating. I think with a typical birthday party that may not be quite this active, you can sort of set them up with 3 particular objectives that they can memorize and do. For example, some kids just barrel into a party and they immediately turn other kids off because they're sort of barreling in impulsively. You could ask them to walk into the party and pause while they count to 60 and observe what's happening during that 60 seconds. And then you could say you go to the birthday person and you wish them a happy birthday. And then you find one person with a friendly face and you sort of introduce yourself to that person or do what that person is doing. So you could just do 3 behaviors that anticipate that they can use every time they go to a birthday party to stop them from maybe getting overstimulated and
right.
overwhelmed.
And if it's the birthday party host, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you can still have behaviors. It depends on what you think, what the needs are, of course, and what you think would be behaviors that they could replace their, negative behaviors with. In terms of the laser tag thing, which is a very overstimulating environment, that one, I don't know if your child's ever been to laser tag, but I think that that's one of those things where you really need to give them experience with that a few times before you release them into a birthday party setting.
Okay.
Because that's like going from 0 to 100.
Check it out beforehand.
Yeah, check it out. Some kids, who are ADD will be fine in that environment because it's the kind of stimulation that is kind of soothing in some ways. But other kids are going to have sensory issues, and it's going to be a very easy place to lose it.
Right.
So if you're kind of preparing them in advance for what that feeling is, the sounds, the sights, the running around, you can kind of practice in advance for how he needs to or she needs to behave in a laser tag setting.
Okay. Turning to a little bit to a number of people have questions about getting their child help. I guess some of the questions are, do you think that social group therapy actually works for kids? I mean, to your point about, it's once a week or whatever. And the second question, a secondary question along this line is, what do you think about summer camps for kids that teach social skills? So your comments, I guess, in general about finding help for your child to improve their social skills.
Okay. A couple of things that when you're doing your research out there on social skills, there's a couple of things that I think you need to find in order for social skills training to be useful. The first thing is it needs to be led by a person with clinical training, preferably someone with group therapy training, because it is a group. Also, the preference is for whoever's working with the child to also work with you as the parent, because you are the person who's going to reinforce the skills outside of that group you're going to be communicating with teachers about what skills they're reinforcing at school. You're going to be working with the child daily on practicing the skills. So I think it's critical that you have a place that has a very high parent involvement. The other thing is that as great as like a lunch bunch group is at school as an adjunct, because I do think lunch bunches are great ways for kids to get together and talk in their guidance counselors' offices, which is terrific, is to realize that there are limitations to that lunch bunch group because of resources and that you're not involved in that process, and it's usually relatively short term. In order for kids to generalize the skills that you're working on with them, they really need at least 9 months of weekly social skills training for them to begin to transfer the skills from the group to the learn setting. So if your expectation is that they're going to change in 6 weeks or 8 weeks in a lunch bunch group or in a group at another setting, that's where you may find, it doesn't work. And it's not because it doesn't work. It's just because you need something more intensive to get the skills to generalize.
What about summer camp programs?
Oh, summer camp I think is great. I mean, there's some really good summer camp programs. I would just check them out in advance and make sure that the camps are, if they're focused on children with ADHD, that's much better. There are sleepaway camps that are geared totally towards ADHD kids. There are camps that have clinicians running the groups, and I think they're fantastic. I think summer camp in general is really fantastic. And if you have a child with ADHD and you have people with training and understanding of ADHD, I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
I will just chime in here that we've done at Attitude, we've done a number of articles on summer camps for ADHD kids. And just talking to the camp directors, I would just say that they're just so tuned in to the fact that social skills training is a huge part of what the camp experience is about, and so articulate about how they help kids in a camp summer setting learn to understand their behaviors and the effect of their behaviors. That I'm just from interviewing these camp directors, I became a big fan of what they do. It's pretty impressive. So
it's very impressive. And when do you have sort of the 24-hour,
right,
kind of
a number of the ones
that
I spoke to saw that as the number one task of an ADHD summer camp, helping kids understand their behavior and its impact on the people around them. So Google that, or look on our do a search on attitudemag.com and find some articles and some references to camps, because I think it's pretty extraordinary opportunity for kids. So nice question here from a teacher. She says, ADHD kids are so frequently criticized in the classroom by teachers, and it sort of sets the stage for other kids to criticize them as well. What can teachers do to minimize the impact of their frequent correcting of the child and the impact of that on the child's social status among their peers?
Oh, it's so true. I mean, I'm so happy to hear the teachers' awareness of how important their own sort of attitude and treatment of a child can influence the group dynamic. I mean, a class is a group, really, and the teacher is the main, spokesman for how other children should be treated. So, the teacher does a lot of setting of the stage for not bullying to occur, too, in the classroom.
Right.
And kids pick up on, exactly as you're saying, kids really pick up on the teacher's attitudes, and if they're frustrated or if they are putting the child down at all, it will be picked up and played out in spades by the other kids in the class. I think that it's really important that the teacher constantly sort of highlight the strengths of each of the kids in their classroom, but especially of the ADHD child, because if they're going to need to help the child get back on track, they're going to have to do it in a positive way, and then they're going to have to make sure that they constantly are replanting any kind of erosive experience. So if they need to do a positive reframe with a child in a classroom, it's really important that they highlight a strength, that they give them leadership roles in the classroom, that they do buddy systems where they get to practice some of their leadership skills with other kids. There are all kinds of positive ways for teachers to interact with all of their kids, but especially is needed with ADHD kids. And just watching how you communicate, your tone of voice, is almost as important, more important than really what you say, is how you say it.
It sounds like we should probably think about another webinar just about the classroom, in what goes on in the classroom, because it seems as if so much happens that affects kids' behavior and social standing in the classroom.
Yeah. Oh, it does. And insight on the part of teachers' awareness of their power and sort of their awareness of how they communicate and making sure that they communicate in as neutral a way as possible and supportive goes a long way in creating the environment they're trying to create.
Yep. Cathi, we're going to have to end shortly. Do you have any final words for the folks on the call in terms of how they can best help their child improve their social skills?
My last word of advice would be to take it one step at a time. Figure out one behavior that you can work on and sort of develop a baseline, get a feeling of how often it happens, when it happens, and then develop a plan for correction of that behavior, and then practice, and reinforce before you move on to the second behavior. Because it can be overwhelming for parents and for kids alike if there's a sort of a shotgun approach taken. It can be very discouraging, and it definitely, you have an optimistic road ahead of you. I can assure you of that. It's going to require patience, as you know, and a step-by-step process, but it absolutely can happen and does happen, and I wish you every best of luck. And also, I have on my website, I have my email address. You can always email me if you have any questions.
That's so nice. Just repeat Cathi's website again, INSTEPP, INSTEPPC.com. We'll have to schedule a follow-up. I have a whole set of questions that I'm dying to ask you, which I'm not about making friends, but keeping them. Thank you so much, Cathi, for your time, and thank you everyone who attended.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.